Here I am over here. I think you got the wrong camera on. Yeah, I think I do have the wrong camera on. Okay. There we go. That's better. Yes, that is better. And we are back. Finally. Yes. Finally, after our summer break and the high holy days and everything, we are back. This is, well, yeah, it's your show. This is the story, Zayde Story Corner. That's right, Zayde Story Corner. And we are going to be picking up. I have no idea what that was all about, but yeah. Okay. For some reason, it wants to install a driver all of a sudden. For some unknown reason. Just turn that down. We don't need it on right now. Anyway, so after the summer and the high holy days and everything, we are back. This is Zeta Story Corner, and we are going to be continuing reading from the book Classic Hasidic Tales, where we left off. And we got about 2/3. Yeah, we got about 2/3 of the way of the book, and in a year's time, so probably won't take us that long to finish it. Probably not. Yes. Okay. So, um, anyway, we're glad to be back. Let's check and see what we got going in the chat room. Shlomo, Kelsey Lynn, Roberta, Susan Connor, and oh, that's right. Today is Canadian Thanksgiving. Yeah, that's right. Canadian Thanksgiving. So happy Thanksgiving to you all, you hosers. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, we don't need to go that way. But anyway, uh, and Stephen has joined us. So okay. So we're going to start. And where's my camera? Oh, well, you see, I moved the camera over here because we had that glitch. Oh yeah, where it kept freezing. Yeah, where it kept freezing up on us, and evidently it was the cable that was doing it. So we've moved the mic or moved the camera for now to a better location where we don't have to use the cable, and hopefully we'll find out tonight if it's going to work as we had planned. But let us go ahead and we'll get you on your camera. There I am, good looking, huh? And Hadara has joined us. So, we are going to start again with our stories, and this one is called The Prince Who Was Made Entirely of Precious Stones. So, let us find out what that is all about, shall we? Okay. There was a king who had no children, and he was greatly troubled with thoughts that after his death his kingdom would pass into the hands of strangers. So he called to him all the physicians and all the magicians of his realm, and commanded them to make use of their learning and of their magic, that a prince might be born to the royal family. But they were of no help to him. Go figure, huh? Okay, so at last, in despair, he turned upon the Jews who lived in his kingdom, for he said, I have heard that among the Jews there are secret saints whose prayers can bring whatever is in the heavens down on earth. So he commanded the Jews to bring one of these saints to the palace. In each generation, there are 36 men whose virtue bears up the world. These called the Lamidvavniks. They live unknown among other men, and they are called hidden Zadikim. When the king commanded that one of them be brought to the palace, the Jews did not know where to turn. But one man went up to another, asking, "Might you be one of these secret Zadikim?" There was a shoemaker in the village. He lived quietly, earning bread for himself and his family, working each day but resting on Shabbos. Then all the people in the village bethought themselves that they had never known him to do any wrong. And they said to one another, "He must be a secret Zadik." But when they came to him and asked him, he only said, "I don't know anything about it. I am a shoemaker." Still, the word went from one village to another, and just slow on the pages there. Yeah, I know. I'm kidding. At last, it came to the king. Wait a minute. I think you turned too many pages there. I think you might be right. Yeah, let's see. There we go. Yeah, that's it. Okay. At last it came to the king that a certain village there lived a shoemaker who was really a hidden Zadik, but who said he knew nothing about it. Well, if he knew something about it, he wouldn't be hidden now, would he? Okay. The king commanded that the man be brought before him, and when the Zadik stood in the palace, the king spoke to him in a friendly way, saying, "You know that all your people are in my power, and I can do good or ill to them as I please. Therefore, I ask you in a friendly way to pray that my queen may have a child." The Zadik went into a little room and spoke to God. Then he returned to the king. "Within a year," the Zadik said, "a child will be born to the queen." And he went home to his village and made shoes. Before the year had passed, the queen gave birth to a daughter. A little girl was so beautiful that whoever looked upon her never ceased wondering at her loveliness. She was so clever that when she was 4 years old, she could play music upon many instruments and speak all languages of mankind. Emperors and sages came from distant lands to look upon and speak with the child. At first, the king was happy with his daughter, but then he grew discontented, for he wanted a son to rule after him, in order that his kingdom might not fall into strange hands. So he commanded that the Synagogue Zadik should be brought before him. And when the king's messengers went to seek out the Zadik, he was told that the man had died. The king said, "Let the Jews find another Zadik." So the Jews asked of one another and sought amongst themselves until they found another of the 36 secret tzaddikim. And they told the king where he was. And the king sent for him and said to him in a friendly way, "If you do not help me, remember that your people are in my power." Then the tzaddik answered, "I will help you if you will give me what I ask." Oh, this is a clever guy. Yes, he is. "I will give half of my possessions for our son," the king cried. "Then," said the tzaddik, "you must bring me precious stones from in every jewel there is a quality of good, and the secret virtues in the jewels are written in the angel's book. Bring me every kind of precious stone, for I have need of them all." The king commanded that jewels be brought, and from all parts of the world there were brought to him the largest and purest of precious stones, a diamond as radiant as a falling star, a pearl as white as an infant's smile, a ruby deep as a friendly eye, a sapphire, agate, carbuncle, an opal stone. These the king gave to the tzaddik, who took them and crushed them into a powder. The powder he poured into a goblet of wine. Then he gave half of the wine to the king to drink, and the queen drank the other half. "You will have a son," said the tzaddik, "who will be made entirely of precious stones, and who will have all the virtues of all the jewels in the world." Then he went home. A son was born to the queen. Now the king was completely happy, for he had a son to reign after him. And though the child appeared to be made like all other children, and not made of precious stones as the tzaddik had predicted, the king was satisfied, for the boy was even more beautiful than his sister, and he too was able to speak the language of all mankind when he was 4 years old. And he knew besides all the wisdom of the world, so that rulers came from far places to ask advice of him. But then the little girl saw emperors and sages coming to the court to seek her younger brother, and no longer for her sake. And when she heard the beauty and the wisdom of her brother constantly praised, while she was forgotten, she became jealous of her brother. Only one thing pleased her. They said he would be made entirely of precious stones. She remembered. "But he is made like all of us." One day, as he was carving wood with a sharp knife, the prince cut his finger. His sister ran to bind up his finger, but as she looked into the wound, she saw a gleaming sapphire there. Then her jealousy turned to hatred, and she thought, only of how she could be revenged upon her brother. There was consternation. Boy, that's a big word. Yes, that is a big word. Consternation. Say it with me, everybody. Consternation. Okay, we go on with the story now. There was consternation in the palace because of the prince's injury. And when the princess saw how the king was troubled, and the people anxious, and the servants ran everywhere, she thought, I too will be ill, and then they will remember me. So she pretended to be sick. Physicians were sent to her, but they could not find out the cause of her illness. At last, the magicians were called, but none of the magicians could help her. She lay in her bed and thought with hatred of her brother, and how he was indeed made of precious stones. Her jealousy gave her no rest. Then the sorcerer, who was the most cunning of all the king's magicians, came to the little girl, and as soon as he saw her, he said, You're not ill, but only pretending illness. She looked into his wicked eyes, and they were like two hard stones pressing upon her. Then she told the sorcerer the truth. I am not ill, she said, but I cannot bear my brother's beauty. He is so beautiful that no one any longer remembers me. Then the princess begged the wizard. Tell me, she cried, is there no way to bewitch a person so that all his body will become converted into itching sores? There is a way, the wizard said. I can make a charm against him. But the clever little princess thought, what if another magician should come and break your charm? Then my brother will be beautiful again. If the charm is buried in water, the sorcerer replied, it can never again be broken. So they made an evil charm against the prince, and they bound their sorcery in a silken cloth and threw it into a deep pool where it could never again be found. Then the prince's tender skin became red and broke. Sores appeared on his face and hands, and they were itching and leprous sores all over his body. The king was terrified. The entire kingdom was in mourning because of the loathsome disease that had come upon the beautiful prince. Every physician and every sage hurried to the palace to try to heal the suffering boy. They covered him with balm and with ointments, but the sores remained upon him, and he tore at his loathsome skin. The physician said, he cannot be cured. Then the king cried, it is the Jews who have brought this thing upon me. And he commanded that the Jews cause the boy to be healed of his sores. Once more, the Jews sought amongst themselves for a secret Zadik, and they found that Zadik. Well, that's three of them in this one area. That's a lot. Yeah, that is a lot for one area because of the 36. They're supposed to be all over the world. That's right. Oh well. And they found that Zadik who had brought about the birth of the prince, and he was brought again to the palace. See what you have done, the king cried. You promised me a son who would be made entirely of precious stones, and instead he is covered with sores. Let me go into a little room where I may be alone, said the Zadik. Then he went into a tiny chamber and closed the door and stood alone and spoke to God. It was not to bring glory to myself that I did this thing, said the Zadik, but it was for the glory of your name that I said that the child would be born, all made of precious stones. And now see how my words have been fulfilled. The boy is covered with sores. Then the truth was revealed to the Zadik, for he knew that nothing happened without a reason, and that the depths of loathsome sin must be felt before the heights of the purest beauty may be known. And he came out and said to the king, a sorcerer has made a charm against the prince to cover him with evil. The charm has been buried in water so that it may not be destroyed. The king was terrified, for he thought that the prince would never be well again. Is there nothing that can be done? He begged. Is there no magician more powerful than the evil one who has done this thing? Since the charm has been buried in water, the Zadik said, there is only one way in which it can be broken. The magician who made the charm must be found, and he also must be thrown into the water. Take all the magicians in my kingdom, cried the king, and throw them into the sea. If only my son will be well. Then he issued a decree that on the very next day, every wizard, sorcerer, and magician in his realm should be thrown into the water. When the princess heard this decree, her guilt made her afraid, for she thought, now the charm will be found out, and they will know that I have done this thing to my brother. So she ran to the pond to take the charm out of the water before anyone else could find it there. But as the princess leaned far over into the pond, seeking for the evil charm, she fell into the water herself, and she sank to the bottom of the deep pool. Then the servants hurried through the palace, crying, the princess has fallen into the pool! And there was crying and wailing everywhere. But when the Zadik heard them, he only smiled and said, now the prince will be well. And so it was as he said. The sores upon the body of the prince began to close and dry up and fall away, and all the wounds fell away. The sticky skin became dry and hard, and it slipped from him as a cloud from the face of the sun. Then the prince stood healed and shining before them, and their eyes were scarcely strong enough to look upon the dazzling brilliance of the boy, for now anyone might see that the prince was indeed made entirely of precious stones, and he had all the virtues of all the jewels in the world. And that is the end of that story. So what you think of that one, huh? That's a pretty good one, I think. Okay, we are going to continue with the next story, The Spider and the Fly. But before we do, we are going to take a little break, and then we will come back, and then we will do the next story, The Spider and the Fly. So, I am going to put on Shlomo's favorite video, and we will be back in 6 minutes. So stay tuned. We be back.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
It's intermission time, folks. So hurry, hurry, hurry. Step right over to our refreshment center for the most extravagant array of refreshment goodies ever assembled under one roof. Enjoy breathtaking, mouth-watering goodies. Everything from a snack to a delicious full meal. At our refreshment center, you'll find a large variety of goodies to satisfy your hunger, your thirst, or your sweet tooth. So hurry, hurry, hurry. Visit our refreshment center now. The show starts in 5 minutes. The show starts in 4 minutes. The show starts in 3 minutes. show starts in 2 minutes. The show starts in 1 minute. And now, on with the show.
And we are back. Okay, not as long a break as we had the last time. That was a couple of months. Anyway, so I see we have some people who have joined us. We have Guy has come in and Colleen has come in. And okay, so we got everybody accounted for. So we go on with these stories, huh? Dude, you just photobombed me. Yeah, I know. I had to lean in a little bit. Well, don't do that. That's my camera. Okay, okay. Don't get so touchy. Okay, so here we are on to the next story. The Spider and the Fly. And the great mountain that spoke in a dream. Now, this sounds interesting now, doesn't it? Okay, let's begin. Perhaps you think I will tell you everything so that you may be able to understand my story. I will begin to tell this story. There was a king who fought a great battle against many nations, and won the battle, and took thousands of prisoners from among all the nations. Every year, on the day of his victory, he caused a great feast to be made. And to the conqueror's festival there came princes and emperors from all the kingdoms of all the world. He would have clowns at the festival to entertain him and his guests with imitations of the different peoples of the world. The comedians would dress themselves in long cloaks with scarves over their heads as Arabs in the desert, and then they would appear as Turks and as Spaniards, and they would make themselves fat as Germans. Sorry about that. And they would make fun of whomever they pleased. And naturally, they did not forget to put on the long beards and to scratch themselves like Jews. The king sat and watched the clowns and tried to guess where they were Arabs or Germans or Spaniards or Jews. Then he ordered that a book of nations be brought to him. And he looked in the book of nations to see how well the clowns had portrayed the different peoples. For the comedians too had looked in the book. But while the king sat over the open volume, he noticed a spider was creeping along the edge of the page. Then he saw that a fly stood upon the open page. With its thin hair-like legs, the spider pulled itself up the side of the book. Then it reached its legs slowly over the side of the book, trying to crawl onto the page where the fly stood. Just then, a wind came and blew on the page so that it stood erect, and the spider could not reach the fly. Lucky fly, eh? Then the spider turned away, and for a while it crept along the table as if it had forgotten the fly. Slowly and carefully, it put out its feet, and then it stood still for a moment, as if it were waiting to hear a sound. When the wind was gone and the page fell back to its place, then the spider turned and crept in a circle, coming nearer and nearer again to the edge of the book, until it climbed up the side of the page, and its little specks of eyes peered over the cliff top top of the book onto the wide plain where the fly remained standing. And the spider lifted its claw onto the page. Once more, the wind came and blew the page upward, and the spider fell away from the edge and could not reach the fly. Now, this happened several times, but at last, the wind was quiet for a long while, and the spider returned to the book and crept up the side and placed its feet upon the open page and drew its body up onto the page. In that instant, the wind blew hard and turned the page over entirely upon the spider, so that he lay on his back between the pages of the book. He tried to crawl out, but he could only crawl a little way, and he could not turn himself aright. And though he moved with all his strength, he could only go a little further into the darkness that pressed upon him between the pages of the book. And there he remained until nothing remained of him. Now, as for the fly, I will not tell you what he did. But the king saw all that had happened, and he knew that what he saw was not a simple thing, but there was a meaning intended for him in what he had seen. And it was as though he had heard a message vaguely through the thick walls. Then he fell into a deep thought, trying to understand what had happened before his eyes. The guests at the festival saw the king was lost in thought, and they did not disturb him. Smart thing to do, eh? You don't want to wake up a king when he's thinking. For a long while, the king looked over the book, wondering, but he could not find a meaning to what he had seen. At last, he became very tired, and his head leaned further over the page until it lay atop his spread arms, and he slept. Then he dreamed. He dreamed that he sat upon his throne in a palace, and over him hung his portrait, and according to the custom in the palaces of the kings, his crown hung over his portrait. He sat there, holding a precious image in his hands. Suddenly, hosts of people began to pour out of the image. He threw the thing away from him. Then the sleeping king saw how the people that rushed out of the image turned and climbed above him and cut his head from the portrait. They seized his crown and hurled it into the mud. Then they ran toward him with knives drawn to kill him. In that instant, a page out of the book upon which he slept stood erect and shielded him, so that the oncoming horde could not do him no harm. When they had turned away, the page fell back into its place in the book. Once more the angry people rushed to kill him, and the page stood up before him and shielded him, so that they had to turn back. 7 times they rushed upon him, and 7 times they were prevented from harming him. Then the king in his sleep was eager to see what was written on the leaf that had so well protected him, and what nation out of the book of nations might be represented there. But as he was about to look at the page, he was overcome by a terrible fear. The edges of his hair felt like ice. He began to scream. The princes and emperors who were his guests heard the king screaming in his sleep and wanted to shake him, that he might awake out of his frightful dream. But it was forbidden to touch the king while he slept. Then they began to shout and to beat upon drums and to make wild noises that might awaken the king. But he did not hear them. They only trembled and cried out and shouted with fear as he slept over the book of nations. Then a high mountain came to him and said, "Why are you screaming so? I was asleep for many ages, and nothing could awaken me, but your screams have broken my sleep." "How can I keep from screaming?" cried the king. "See how all the people are assembled, how they come against me with their drawn knives. They will kill me, and I have nothing to protect me but this little sheet of paper." "As long as it stands before you, you have nothing to fear," said the mountain. I too have many enemies, but the same leaf has protected me, and I am not afraid. Come, I'll show you my enemies." They went, and the king saw myriad upon myriad of warriors assembled at the foot of the mountain. They were shouting and dancing loudly, blowing their trumpets. "Why do they sing so gaily, and why do they dance so triumphantly?" the king asked the mountain. "Each time one of them thinks of a plan by which they may come up to me, they become wild with joy, and hold a feast, and they dance and sing in triumph," said the mountain. "But the same page protects me by what is written upon it, just as you are protected." Then the king saw that a tablet stood on the top of the mountain. But because the mountain was very high, he could not read what was written on the tablet. Behind them, however, was another stone on which was written, "He that has all his teeth may come up to the top of the mountain." The king thought, "Surely there are many people who can easily go up this way." But he looked at the ground, and he saw that they were not pebbles, but teeth of men and beasts upon which he trod. And all over the side of the mountain were little mounds of teeth. For the power of the name had caused no grass to grow on the side of the mountain. And this grass was such that it drew out teeth of all those who passed over it. The enemies from below tried to ride over it on the backs of swift horses, or in wagons, thinking that they would not touch the grass. Nevertheless, their teeth fell out of them, and they could go no further up against the mountain. When the king had seen this, he returned to the palace of his own dream, and saw that now his own enemies, who were the people that had rushed out of the image, took up the head of his portrait and placed it back upon the shoulders. Then they took the crown out of the mud, they washed it, and hung it in its accustomed place. And then the king awoke. At once he looked into the book to see what was written on the page that had protected him. And he found that the page of the book of nations was the page of the Jews. He read carefully what was written there, and he began to understand the truth. And he said, "I will become a Jew." But when he had become a Jew, he was not yet satisfied and cried out, "The whole world must know the truth, and I will make all the people in the world into Jews." But he could not think of a way by which he could show the truth to the whole world, and cause all men to become Jews. So he decided, "I will go and seek a sage who can tell me the meaning of everything in my dream, and then I shall know how to do what I want to do." The king disguised himself as a simple traveler and took 2 companions and went out to seek a wise man. Wherever he went, he asked, "Is there anyone here who can explain a dream?" Though he traveled all over the earth, he could find no one who understood the meaning of his dream. But at last he was told of a sage who lived in a place that had no name. When the king had been to every place that had a name, he continued to seek. And at last he reached a place where there were no hills or trees or rivers, no houses, no beasts, and there was a man. "What is the name of this place?" the king asked. The man answered him, "This place has no name." Then the king knew that he had come to the end of his journey, and that this man was the sage who could tell him the meaning of his dreams. So he told the wise man the truth about himself. "I am no simple traveler," he said, "but a king who has won many battles and conquered many nations. And now I would like to know the true meaning of my dream." The sage answered that he could not give him the meaning of his dream, but that if the king would wait until a day that was not in a month, he might himself learn what he wanted to know. "For on that day," the wise man said, "I gather the seeds of all the things that make them into a perfume. And when the perfume is spread all about you, you will have the power to see for yourself that all that you desire to know." The king said, "I will wait." He waited. And there came a time when he no longer knew the day and the month. Then the wizard brought him a perfume and burned the perfume until it rose all about the king. And in the cloud the king began to see. And what did he see? We will have to wait till next week to find out. How do you like that? Another cliffhanger. Okay. Well, let's switch the cameras here. So we're going to start right out with a cliffhanger. Well, of course we are. That keeps them bringing back. Yeah, okay. I get it. Okay. Well, we're almost at the end of our time. Don't forget, on Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern is the Torah study with Rabbi A and Reb Reuben. We have to check on them. Yeah, I know we have to check on him. And we also, tonight, actually, starts Rosh Chodesh, Cheshvan. Mar Cheshvan, yes, Mar Cheshvan. We'll begin at the Ma'ariv tonight. So don't forget to add the prayers for the first day of Rosh Chodesh. And don't forget that we will again be after Wednesday. We will be back Friday evening at 8 p.m. for Kabbalat and Ma'ariv Shabbat service, and then on Shabbat morning at 10 a.m. For Parsha Noach. That's right, for Parsha Noach. We hope to see you then. Until then, everybody, Laila Tov.